It's August 31st, 1977. A single mother in North London puts her 4 children to bed, completely unaware that in less than an hour, something will happen that will change their lives forever. Within days, police officers will flee her home in terror. Photographers will capture evidence that still baffles experts today. And 2 of the most respected paranormal investigators in Britain will stake their reputations on what they witnessed. What happened in that ordinary council house would become the most documented poltergeist case in history. But here's what makes this story different from every other ghost story you've heard. Dozens of credible witnesses saw it happen. The evidence was recorded. The phenomena were investigated by skeptics who came to debunk it and left believers. I'm going to take you through the entire Enfield Poltergeist case, day by day, witness by witness. And I'm going to show you the evidence that's never been explained. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case refuses to die, and why even the harshest skeptics can't quite explain everything away. But first, we need to understand who these people were before their lives turned into a nightmare. A completely unremarkable 3-bedroom council house in a working-class neighborhood. No dark history, no previous reports of hauntings, just a regular home. Peggy Hodgson lived there with her 4 children, Margaret, who was 13, Janet, who was 11, Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 10. Peggy had recently separated from her husband, and like many single mothers in 1970s Britain, she was doing her best to keep the family together on a tight budget. The neighbors all described them the same way: normal, ordinary, nothing special. The kids went to school, played outside, fought with each other like siblings do. Peggy worked hard and kept a clean house. By every account, this was the last family you'd expect to be at the center of a paranormal investigation. And here's something crucial. Peggy Hodgson didn't believe in ghosts. She wasn't interested in the paranormal. She didn't read ghost stories or watch horror films. When the event started, her first instinct wasn't, "we have a ghost." It was, "someone's playing a prank, and then we need to call the police." That detail matters, because what you're about to hear isn't the story of true believers looking for ghosts. It's the story of skeptical people being forced to confront something they couldn't explain. August 31st, 1977. Peggy puts the kids to bed around 9:30 p.m. Margaret and Janet share a room. The girls are settling in when they hear it. Shuffling sound. Janet calls out to her mother, thinking maybe it's her brothers messing around. But the boys are in their own room, already asleep. The shuffling continues. Then, according to both girls, their beds start to move. Not a little vibration. Not something you could mistake for settling floorboards. The beds are physically moving across the room, sliding several feet with the girls still in them. Peggy hears the screaming and runs upstairs. When she gets to the room, the beds are in the wrong place. She tells the girls to stop playing around and pushes the beds back. But here's where it gets interesting. As she's standing there, she hears the shuffling sound herself, coming from the other side of the room. She searches everywhere. Behind furniture, in closets, under beds, there's no one there, no explanation. She checks on the boys, they're sound asleep, couldn't have caused it. Peggy Hodgson is not a woman who scares easily, but she's unsettled. She tells the girls it must have been nothing, and everyone goes back to bed. But the next night, it happens again, and this time, it's worse. The family is still shaken from the previous night, but Peggy's convinced herself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe a truck driving by shook the house. Maybe the kids were half asleep and imagined things. She puts the children to bed at the same time, around 9:30 p.m. This time, the knocking starts almost immediately. 4 loud knocks, evenly spaced, then silence, then 4 more knocks. They're coming from multiple locations: the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Peggy runs upstairs. The kids are terrified. She goes from room to room trying to find the source. Every time she thinks she's located it, the knocking moves to a different wall. Then things start flying off the shelves. A small toy, then a book, then a decorative plate. They don't just fall, according to Peggy and the children. They move horizontally through the air before dropping to the ground. Peggy has had enough. She grabs the kids, takes them next door to her neighbors, Vic and Peggy Nottingham, and tells them what's happening. The Nottinghams are skeptical. Who wouldn't be? But they agree to come have a look. And this is where the story becomes impossible to dismiss as family imagination or attention-seeking behavior, because what happens next is witnessed by people outside the family. Vic and Peggy Nottingham enter the house expecting to find nothing. Maybe the pipes are making noise. Maybe there's an animal in the walls. They're looking for a rational explanation. They stand in the hallway between the children's bedrooms. Peggy Hodgson is with them. The knocking starts again. 4 deliberate knocks. Vic Nottingham puts his hand on the wall to feel for vibrations. The knocking moves to the opposite wall. He walks over there. It moves again. Then they all hear a loud crash from the kitchen. They rush downstairs. A chair has been knocked over, and it's in the middle of the room, nowhere near any surface it could have fallen from. Vic Nottingham, a practical man who works with his hands, can't explain what he's seen. He later tells investigators, "It wasn't what I expected. Things were happening that shouldn't be possible." The Nottinghams call the police. Because at this point, they're all thinking the same thing. Someone must be breaking in, playing tricks on this family. There has to be a person doing this. The police arrive at 11:05 p.m. Officer Carolyn Heaps is the first on scene. She's about to have an experience that will stay with her for the rest of her career. Police Constable Carolyn Heaps arrives expecting a domestic disturbance or maybe kids playing pranks. She's a professional, experienced officer. She's seen a lot in her years on the force, but she's never seen anything like what's about to happen. She enters the house and interviews the family. Everything seems calm. She's writing in her notebook, documenting the complaint when she hears the knocking. 4 loud, deliberate knocks from the wall. She walks over to investigate. Then, and this is documented in her official police report, she sees a chair move. Not a vibration, not a slight shift. The chair slides approximately 4 feet across the kitchen floor by itself, with no one touching it. She examines the chair. She checks the floor for wires, magnets, anything that could explain it. There's nothing. She searches the house thoroughly, looking for hidden people or mechanisms. The house is clear. PC Heaps goes back to the station and files a report confirming that she witnessed furniture moving of its own accord. This isn't a civilian claiming they saw something. This is a trained police officer putting her reputation on the line to document unexplained phenomena. When asked later why she included it in her official report, she said, "I know what I saw. I'm not saying what it was, but I know what I saw." The police can't help further. There's no evidence of a break-in, no crime being committed, but they don't dismiss the family as crazy. Because PC Heaps saw it too. This is when Peggy Hodgson realizes she needs different kind of help. She doesn't know what's happening in her house, but she knows she can't live like this. Someone suggests she contact the Society for Psychical Research, an organization that's been investigating paranormal claims since 1882. On September 5, 1977, Maurice Gross arrives at 284 Green Street. Gross is not some eccentric ghost hunter. He's a successful businessman, an inventor who holds patents, a rational man who only became interested in the paranormal after his daughter died in a motorcycle accident. He's looking for evidence of life after death, and he approaches investigations with scientific rigor. He expects to spend a few hours debunking what's probably a case of creaky pipes and overactive imaginations. Instead, he spends the next 2 years documenting the most extraordinary phenomena he'll ever witness. On his first visit, Grosse sets up audio recording equipment and cameras. He interviews each family member separately. He examines the house for tricks or hidden devices. And then, within hours of arriving, he experiences his first incident. A marble rolls across the floor, uphill, defying gravity. He watches it with his own eyes. He picks up the marble, examines the floor. There's no explanation. Over the next few days, Gross documents knocking sounds, objects moving, and something else, something that makes this case unique in paranormal research, a voice, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, Gross calls for backup. He needs a witness with scientific credentials, someone who can document this properly. He contacts Guy Lyon Playfair, a fellow researcher and experienced investigator. Playfair arrives skeptical. He's investigated dozens of supposed hauntings and found natural explanations for most of them. But what he witnesses at the Hodgson house will convince him to stake his professional reputation on the case. Together, Gross and Playfair begin a comprehensive investigation that will produce hundreds of hours of audio recordings, thousands of photographs, and dozens of witness statements. And the phenomena are just getting started. October 1977. The activity intensifies in ways that seem almost impossible to believe. But remember, all of this is documented by multiple witnesses, many of whom came specifically to debunk it. Objects fly through the air daily, not just small items, heavy furniture, appliances, toys. Investigators photograph a sofa that's been turned upside down. They document marbles that appear to move on their own, disappear from one room, and appear in another. The knocking becomes more complex. When Gross knocks on a wall 3 times, the knocking responds with 3 knocks. When he asks it to knock a specific number of times, it complies. He's communicating with something. 11-year-old Janet becomes the focus of the phenomena. Toys gravitate toward her. Objects fly when she's in the room. And then, the most disturbing development, Janet begins to levitate. Now, levitation is the kind of claim that sounds absurd, the kind of thing skeptics immediately dismiss. But here's what makes this case different. Multiple witnesses see it happen, on separate occasions, and some of them photograph it. The photographs show Janet in midair, apparently suspended above her bed, her body horizontal. Skeptics later argue these photos just show her jumping. But the witnesses describe something different. They describe her rising slowly, floating, then gently returning to the bed, and they describe her being asleep when it happens. Graham Morris, a professional photographer sent by the Daily Mirror to document the case, witnesses the levitation personally. He's there specifically to expose a hoax, but what he photographs and witnesses changes his mind. He later states, "I was there to get a picture of trickery, but I came away believing something genuinely unexplained was happening." But the levitation isn't even the strangest part of this case. The strangest part is what happens next. Late October 1977. About 2 months into the investigation, Janet starts making strange guttural sounds while she sleeps. At first, investigators think she's just having nightmares. But then, the sounds form words. A deep, rasping male voice starts speaking through 11-year-old Janet, and this voice claims to be Bill Wilkins, a man who died in the house years before. Now, here's where most people would completely dismiss this case as obvious fraud. A little girl doing a spooky voice, that's the oldest trick in the book. And initially, investigators are skeptical too. They test Janet extensively. They have her drink water while speaking. She continues speaking in the voice. They have speech therapists examine her. They confirm she's somehow producing a voice that shouldn't be possible for a child her age, using vocal techniques that would damage the throat if sustained. Medical professionals examine her vocal cords and find inflammation consistent with the strain of producing this unnatural voice. But here's the detail that's harder to explain. The voice provides information that Janet shouldn't have known. Bill Wilkins, according to the voice, died in a chair downstairs from a brain hemorrhage. Investigators check with the previous tenant. A man named Bill Wilkins did die in the house, in a chair downstairs. The voice accurately describes the house's layout from decades earlier, before renovations. It mentions neighbors who lived there in the 1930s, details Janet would have no way of knowing. Skeptics argue that Janet could have researched this information, talked to old neighbors, learned about the house's history. But remember, this is 1977, before the internet. Janet is an 11-year-old from a working-class family. She doesn't have the resources or, frankly, the sophisticated acting ability to maintain this deception for months under constant observation. The voice recordings are disturbing to listen to. This rough, elderly male voice coming from a child, saying things like, "Just before I died, I went blind, and then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in the chair in the corner downstairs." Gross conducts extensive interviews with the voice, documenting hours of conversations. Sometimes the voice is cooperative, sometimes it's angry, hostile, and sometimes, disturbingly, it admits it's lying when Gross asks directly if it's really Bill Wilkins. Sometimes the voice says, "No, I'm just having a lark. I like annoying them." This admission of deception has been used by skeptics to dismiss the entire case, but it raises an equally troubling question. If Janet is faking it, why would she break character to admit she's faking? Wouldn't a hoaxer maintain the illusion? The voice phenomenon continues for months, becoming more disturbing and complex over time. As news of the Enfield case spreads, more investigators arrive. Not all of them are believers. Many come specifically to expose what they assume is a hoax. Anita Gregory, a psychology professor and skeptic, visits the house determined to prove fraud. She catches Janet and Margaret bending spoons and faking phenomena on 2 occasions. This is documented on video. The girls admit they sometimes exaggerated or faked incidents because they were bored or wanted attention. This revelation leads many to dismiss the entire case. If the children faked some events, the logic goes, they probably faked all of them. Case closed, hoax exposed. But here's the problem with that conclusion. The children only confessed to faking some specific incidents, and those incidents were relatively minor. They never confessed to, and couldn't explain, the phenomena witnessed by police, neighbors, investigators, and journalists. They couldn't explain the voice recordings or the physical evidence documented by multiple parties. Maurice Grosse addresses this directly. Yes, the children played tricks sometimes. They're children. They were living in an extraordinary situation, and sometimes they wanted attention. But that doesn't explain what I witnessed personally, what was photographed, what was recorded, what dozens of credible witnesses saw. Other skeptics propose various theories. Maybe it's all hallucination, but multiple people don't have identical hallucinations of the same chair moving at the same time. Maybe it's fraud by the mother. But Peggy Hodgson is documented being in different rooms when phenomena occur, and she never profits from the case. She actively avoids media attention and never tries to monetize the story. The most rational skeptical position is that some combination of childish pranks, misperception, and suggestibility explains most events, with a few remaining anomalies that are simply unexplained. But this position requires ignoring a lot of documented evidence from credible witnesses. The investigation continues for 18 months in total. By the end, Grosse and Playfair have documented over 1,000 separate incidents, recorded hundreds of hours of audio, and collected testimony from over 30 witnesses. The phenomena gradually decreased in late 1978 and stopped completely by 1979. There's no dramatic conclusion, no final confrontation. The activity just slowly fades away, like a storm passing. Janet, now in her late 50s, has spoken about the case as an adult. She admits that yes, she and her sister faked some incidents, maybe 2% of what was reported. But she maintains that the vast majority of what happened was real and that the experience traumatized her. She says she wishes it had never happened and that she just wants to live a normal life. The other family members have given similar accounts. They don't profit from telling the story. They don't seek attention. They simply maintain that something genuinely unexplained happened in their home, and they lived through something terrifying. Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair both went to their graves maintaining the Enfield Poltergeist was genuine. They wrote books about it, gave lectures, defended their investigation against skeptics. They knew their reputations would be damaged by supporting such a controversial case, and they did it anyway because they believed the evidence was solid. So what really happened at 284 Green Street, Enfield? The skeptical explanation is that it was primarily a hoax perpetrated by attention-seeking children, with some elements of mass hysteria and misperception thrown in. The believer's explanation is that it was a genuine poltergeist, haunting, possibly connected to Janet's entry into puberty and the stress in the household after the parents' separation. The truth is probably somewhere in between, or stranger than either explanation. Maybe some events were faked, some were misperceived, and some remain genuinely unexplained. Maybe we don't have the framework yet to understand what actually happens in cases like this. What we know for certain is this: something happened. Multiple credible witnesses saw it. It was documented extensively. And no one has provided a complete explanation that accounts for all the evidence. The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most compelling paranormal cases ever investigated because it has something most ghost stories lack: evidence. Not perfect evidence, not indisputable proof, but enough documentation and enough credible witnesses that dismissing it entirely requires ignoring a lot of data. You can draw your own conclusions about what happened in that house. But one thing is undeniable: the Hodgson family's lives were changed forever by something they couldn't control and couldn't explain, and dozens of witnesses who came to debunk them left unable to explain what they'd seen. The case continues to fascinate researchers, skeptics, and believers alike. It's been the subject of books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood horror film. But beyond the entertainment and the debate, there's a real family who lived through something extraordinary. And sometimes, late at night, when you hear an unexplained knock or see something move from the corner of your eye, you might wonder, what if they were telling the truth?